Okay, so we got a new rig in front of us. This might be a really scary screen for some of you. You'll see all these pluses across and you're thinking, how do I do this? We're going to walk through it real quick. I'm going to show you how to develop a rig within the Headrush so that you're not relying just completely on presets. Try to make this video less than about 5 minutes or so. We'll see how this goes. So let's get going. So before you start your rig, you got to understand some of your food groups. So the first thing we want to look into is the wah pedal, or like a whammy pedal or something like that. That's going to be the very first thing that enters into your signal chain. So let's do that. We're going to make our expression pedal here a wah pedal before we start. This is where you're first coming in. Now if you double tap on the in, you'll notice this thing already kind of comes with its own gate, which is really neat. You've got an input gain, you got a gate threshold, and you typically, depending on the kind of noise that you're getting on your guitar, you probably want this thing around neg 70, maybe negative 80. But when you plug your guitar in, you want to look at this meter just to see where your meters are at, and then go from there. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to click on this plus button right here, and the very first food group, if you will, it's going to be our expression pedal. We're going to pick a wah pedal. We're going to go with the black wah default. And that's going to be our first in our signal chain. You notice as we create, we go from the pluses to like an amp or like an effect or something, it's going to automatically populate that into your switches for what you want it to do. You can go back to one of my scene videos and I'll show you how to make these switches do what you want. I'm currently in stomp box mode right now, which is the mode I recommend you be in, but you can select different rigs if you want in here as well. We're going to double click on the black wah. Just to show you, right now it's defaulted to the expression pedal, so when I move the foot switch back and then move it forward, you'll notice it is affecting that expression pedal, so that's good. We're going to press that in so that it's off for now. Alright, the next part of our food group that we really need to pay attention to that's in your Headrush, let's say we want some, some kind of dynamics going on. Let's say we want some ability to compress our signal. So there's a few compressors here. We got a side compressor, also known as a side compressor. We got dynamic compression and we got a gray compressor. We're going to go with the simple gray compressor there. So that'll be next in our chain. And again, if you double tap on that, you can select what kind of levels you want and where you want the compressor to be at. This one's pretty simple. It's already got its compression on by default. All you got to figure out is what kind of sustain you want. That's pretty self-explanatory. More sustain, the longer your note holds, so on and so forth. It also acts, I believe, as sort of more like a ratio as well. Okay, next on our list, we want to add a distortion pedal. That's going to be the next part of our food groups. So let's go to our distortion. For this particular exercise, we're going to go for a light gain. So we want to go for either like a white boost, the green JRCOD, which emulates sort of like a tube screamer. If you scroll down, you also have the Klon, which is like the K drive. The DD250 isn't a bad one either. The S1 drive is another one. You can go that route. We're going to pick the tube screamer because we're going to be boring here. And again, if you double click on that, you can edit those levels and so on and so forth. Drive, tone, level, all that. All right, next is going to be our amp. I'm looking at the clock. I've already gone 4 minutes. Well, so much for the 5-minute video. Let's pick the JCM 45 because I feel like it. Now, for this particular scenario, I'm going to treat this as if we are running our Headrush unit into our effects return, into our amp, or directly into the front of a clean amp. So, after I select an amp, I want to click and drag this speaker cabinet off to delete it, because I don't want it there at all, covering up a space. If you're just running this into, say, a mixing board or the front of your audio interface, or you're live gigging with this and you're just going straight into the front of the PA, obviously you want that speaker cabinet there, and I would recommend you have that speaker cabinet at the very end of your rig. There's also some nice things you can do to make it have more of a stereo-like sound, you would actually place that just before your delay and your reverb. We'll get that out in a minute. Okay, so after the amp, now if we want some modulation effects, that's what we would put there. So let's throw a modulation effect in there. Let's go regular good old-fashioned chorus. Pick one of the presets in there. You can double click. You can look at all the presets, see what it does. Rate, feedback, depth, mix and width, all that fun stuff. So that's another part of your fruit group. So real quick, before we keep going, I want to double back real quick. So you've got your wah. So if you got a wah or a whammy, that would go first. Next would come your compressors. After that, you want your distortion pedal, like an overdrive, whatever you want there. After the overdrive, then you want like your amp. And then after the amp, you'll want your modulation. To get a little bit more in the weeds, real quick, I'll demonstrate something too. We'll move that chorus pedal over. If you want to shape your tone a little bit further and you want some EQ in there and you want to pick one of these EQ pedals, graphic or parametric. Parametric is where you can get really crazy in there. Graphic EQ has some stock EQs that you can manipulate, which it's really hard to see in this graphic. It is not representative of, say, like a Boss GE7. The EQ on this one is going to be slightly different. I'm going to do this best I can. I can read this, but it goes 100 hertz. I think that's 370, 800. You got 2, and then 3.25, I think is what you got in there. But you can manipulate these in there and adjust as your ears desire. But that's where I would recommend you put your EQ pedal. There's no right or wrong reason where you really put that thing. I prefer the EQ pedal after the amp because I want the amp's tone to then be colored further. I don't want my guitar's tone going in EQ'd out a certain way and then hitting my amp. If you're really nuts about your pickups and you know like you're going from a single coil to a humbucker, I could see you running your EQ pedal before the amp because in that case you would want your EQ pedal to manipulate the guitar rather than the amp sound. Or if you want to use it as a boost, you would then use your EQ pedal as like an overdrive pedal. I'm not trying to overcomplicate this, but then another place you could put this EQ pedal, honestly, is right at the tail end of your modulation. You could put it there, and why you would do that is, again, using it as a boost, but not in a boost of a sense of, say, if you were to use like an overdrive pedal where you have the drive cranked all the way down and the level cranked all the way up. You would use this literally to bring the signal up just a few dB to gain yourself more presence when doing a solo or something like that. Then you would have the EQ pedal after all of that. That's how I would recommend you do it. Next, after your modulation, your choruses, your tremolos, those kinds of things, I would then place your delays. You'll notice delays and reverb are kind of in the same section here. We're going to do bucket brigade. And then we're going to place our reverb pedal. Oh, what kind of reverb do I want? Doesn't really matter, I guess, because I'm not going to play anything in front of you. So if you want to make a rig, these are the general steps you want to follow. Wah first, then whammy, then compressor, then an overdrive or distortion pedal, amp, EQ, modulation effects such as chorus and tremolo, delays, then reverbs. And then if you have this going into a mixing board or into a PA system, again, I would recommend, I'll do it in front of you, I would recommend then putting your cabinet there instead. And you would put it right there. Right after your modulation, just before your delays and reverbs. And where you put your delay and where you put your reverb, that's going to be all up to your ear. Just depends on what you want to do. And then from there, you'll just go to hardware assign and figure out what buttons you want to do what, you know? So that's really depends on how you want everything to run. If you want to have access to when you want your compressor on and let's say we want to have access when we want our drive on, and the other thing we want to be able words is hard, guys. If you want to be able to manipulate when you want your delay on, that might be a few switches you might have for very basic purposes, and then the rest is just left on at all times. That might be a rig for you. Hopefully that gets you started. Hopefully that teaches you a thing or two. Real quick, just remember this too. I apologize. If you want like phaser or flanger going on, that is actually not the same as like your chorus or tremolo. Typically you want those effects coming before the amp. So even though your flangers and your phasers, those are in the same food group per se, even like your octaves, which is very similar to like a whammy pedal, which is where you would want it before the amp and not after. You want those hitting before the amp. So like a flanger, that would be before your amp. That's how that would look. But again, just experiment with these things. But that gives you the basic layout of where you want your rig to be. I will create a second video showing how I integrate my rig with the MX5 and which effects and amps that I use, just to give you an idea of how to use this thing with other pedals. But this should get you started as far as how to incorporate your Headrush MX5 with the sound that you're going for, and how to create your own rig. Hopefully this helps you out a little bit. If you got any more questions, comments, whatever, let me know. In the meantime, rock on. Take it easy, guys. Have a good one.